All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Emily Kyle. We try to do these webinars on a monthly basis, and I love having outside speakers because I know what I know, but there are so many resources that families need to make all of this useful to them. So we're thrilled today to have Tom Cory here from Divergent. People obviously one of the issues with the neurodiversity population is being able to become employed and then remain employed. And so understanding how to get there so that everybody, regardless of whatever your needs might be, can be employed and feel important and feel productive and doing everything that their parents are doing and their siblings are doing is just so important to their overall health. So with that, Tom, I'll let you introduce yourself and the floor is yours. And then I know we did get a question, so we'll answer that at the end. So thank you all for attending. And it's all yours, Tom.
Wonderful. Well, so glad to be here, and thanks, Emily. And so we may have crossed paths with some folks on the call. We've been at the Arizona Autism Expo and in Phoenix. I think going on, this was maybe our third year, and so some of this presentation you'll see is kind of based off of that. And what we kind of think of as a good start for really a wide range of audiences. This can be people who are still having younger kids and just kind of want to know what to may expect, or as we'll kind of highlight later, like transition is not just bound by an age, right? And of course life brings many different transitions over the years. So we're going to really focus on how to preparing to start a career and getting job ready and talk more about that. So, and I'm Tom Cory. That's me a few years ago and a few inches of hair ago as well. So I live in Austin, Texas right now, where we have our services available to the Texas equivalent of the Arizona Voc Rehab, Arizona DES. And so I'm down here helping lead operations. I also lead operations in Arizona, and then I also have staff who's more involved in the day-to-day things. So really my background and career started really within 2011, really getting involved within special education and transition in Philadelphia, and then really transitioning from there into doing direct service in the vocational setting. And then along the way doing also program direction and job coaching at times for large multinational software companies and professional consultancies like Ernst & Young, SAP, Dell Computer. And so that's kind of where more of my interest, for people familiar, like the vocational field, that's not very common to branch into the tech space, but luckily that's indicative of the world's attitudes and opinions, and really inclusion helping drive some of these things. So I myself am a neurodiverse individual, and so that kind of does bring in some of the personal connection here. And then I'll share with you about our namesake, our co-founder, Byron Dye. He started the company in 2017 with his childhood best friend, who's our CTO, Rahul Mahida. And this really grew out of love for his brother Byron, and the desire to see the world change around vocation. Also kind of some personal family challenges of really him being in a position to help be a caregiver with his dad long term for his brother. So really cool to see that. And of course within this space happens, right? People do for their loved ones, and that's awesome. And so in that time we've grown to be a multi-state vocational rehabilitation licensed vocational service provider. So right now that's in Arizona and Texas. And then we also have active projects within 4 other states with voc rehabs. So so that's really cool. Been featured in places like New York Times. That's Byron and his brother, believe at the Grand Canyon. So Okay, so this is more for this presentation. What we try to you know keep in mind questions like this here of like, how many people within here, and this is a little hard to do this part. I won't be able to see everybody, but just, this is just to get everybody thinking. And I'm sure there's some shared overlap here. So like, self-advocate or loved one with ASD, or a neurodiverse condition or any other form of condition, really. Because what we'll talk about does apply, cross condition as well, especially when you really look at trying to specialize things for people. Have you started that employment journey, yet with your loved one? Are you confident, that your loved one will be able to successfully transition in adulthood and independence? And then, also kind of this question of, yeah, what is the value here? The belief of what a job is, or, that kind of individual assignment that we make. Let me look here. Oh, great. Thanks for sharing. People are sharing their perspective of audience. And let's see. Okay, so yeah, that's what I figured. A lot of people are adult, but then so then this is to address here of understanding the steps that go into preparing someone with ASD to get to that point of job ready. Understanding vocational rehabilitation, that's gonna be something that we definitely want to keep highlighting to people. Certainly, like we're a provider, right, within the system, and I think that we're always careful to listen to people's experiences, right? I mean, it's a large system, like anybody who's talking about the healthcare system, right? That's one of the hardest things about working within voc rehab, or really broadly speaking this space, is that feeling of knowing that oftentimes there are unequal outcomes in services. There's big challenges that happen, and those are all very personal to the individual and your family, right? So those things very much matter. So I'm curious, as we keep going, kind of how people feel about VR, what has been their experience going through VR. And we feel like our role is to always help try to advocate, that this is part of a public benefit system that is highly accessible, really fairly independent of income. There's a wide range of people that can get vocational rehabilitation services, especially probably where the law firm can help you figure out, especially how you designate your child, dependent or not. There's generally a lot of really good resources in there, but we acknowledge it's challenging. So we can talk more about, what that looks like, and hear from people's experiences. And then we want to help you hopefully leave with just a few resources if you've not kind of gone in that way. And I have already like 2 questions I'll address once we get closer to the end. So sorry there, preparing to be job ready, right? Okay, so I think it just kind of always helps to orient people a little bit. Like, of course it's made up, but we can kind of think of, how archetypes like this, when we're trying to think back and just understand where someone's been, is a good way to kind of idealize and think about how we could maybe make this a process for one of your loved ones. So just a little bit background, right? Somebody who would have maybe a moderate learning disability, they could show creative strengths, you know, um, unsure of goals, not the most uncommon thing, right? Honestly, pretty indifferent of disability. I'd say that attribute there is just not knowing, and that's something that I think as parents and loved ones, and we can try to better understand and reflect back to our loved one just how common something like that is, right? Normalize that issue, because that's like the issue that, I'll assume that in large part this audience had experienced some form of that. I know I certainly did. And there can be room for people to still understand what they want to do, That should be the message, especially to an 18-year-old. You have time, maybe not that much time, and you can set with them what that time expectation is. But I think that they're finishing senior year of high school, planning her IEP, doing an extended school year, all these things. So, this may relate to certain individuals. So, so the question here is, right, you're still further out from the goal. So this is what people always ask me, like, well, should I start for employment? And it's almost always no, it's never too early or too late. Again, if we think more about these as like just very fixed timelines and things, it doesn't really help us, right? Because we really have to address where the student and the individual is at that time, So if that means even taking the smallest pre-planning steps, but the real message here is that this will just come a lot sooner, right? And so trying to plan for it, even if it feels like minuscule, it doesn't feel like employment, we can start with this kind of set here. So before any of this, it's really like being able to socialize work. That's the important part here too, is that, thinking of younger children, especially, this is already built into a lot of our play. You want to be the fireman, you want to be the cop, you want to be the doctor, right? Where for our individuals or loved ones with neurodiversity, there may be different ways that you want to discuss that with them. It can be play, but you can also show the person the real context of it and help them learn more about it and talk about it in the right kind of light, right? Hey, this is a job. People get paid to do this. You might need to do this and that. I don't expect that these are natural conversations for a parent to have. And that also, like, I would just encourage you, if you feel like you keep saying it and you're not getting a response, that's okay. Yeah, we can't always depend on our children to tell us when they're listening, right? And particularly for our individuals who have that verbal challenge, perhaps, or that processing challenge. I think that the time, repetition, exposure, and really taking that care to point out to people that you're supporting, what is a job? How do people get paid? Why did mom and dad leave all day, right? Well, we're working, right? And trying to give, in an age appropriate context, but certainly not trying to wait too long, right? Again, you might not get the signals right away, but those connections are starting to be formed. So I think just be patient about it. So these are just examples of, right, like how you can build incremental responsibility into people's routines. Compensating, this could be, informal, kind of labor type arrangements, the neighbor, the family friend, things like that. And as you start to really think of it as that you would be guiding, even within this age range, and we do put a wider range because I think it has to be accepted within, particular to ASD, but really many neurodiverse conditions, that there is perhaps a delay present, but this does not preclude the development from happening. In other words, the development will happen. It's just going to happen later, right? So we still have to prepare for those skills to come into place. And so, like, we're not, again, like putting it off or like waiting for that. We might be approaching it at different times. So you'll know when to make the next kind of transition when you start to within this range, and so that's why they're written as ranges. But okay, so like, now it's like really building routine, right? That's a good thing too. And also doing it for things that the person's more inclined to like. And so this is also kind of like throughout, but even as you're prior to even really having a discussion, you can start to make little observations. Kind of this might, again, maybe this isn't the most natural thing as a parent, but this is what a voc professional would do. That this is what one of my job coaches or a skills trainer would be doing in the midst of getting to know a client, so, and of course, that this is teachers, like, right, we're showing that this is like a team that you can kind of as I said, kind of get the data on people, get a little bit of information from a few different sources, and maybe start to kind of like challenge it a little bit, and just like note it down. And these are the kind of exercises that we'll guide parents through. And it's pretty amazing, even without maybe always having a notebook around. Once you start to have a conversation with a parent, it doesn't take too long before you're naturally thinking like that. Now, the next kind of step of this would be how to, kind of translate it, right? How do you get that information? Which, sometimes can be a very narrow. It doesn't have to be small. There can be many things that someone's really good at, but they just might be like a little specialized. So you start to, work with particularly like voc professionals, voc providers, voc rehab counselors, talking to school psychologists, guidance counselors, really using a whole team approach to start to figure out what is maybe the core skill there. And then really that's what it is. It's barriers to skills, or do you need helps with the skills? Like, what would it be? Skill exists, but there's maybe more barriers to taking it, right? So you can start to then think about what comes next. All right. So this is kind of a carryover from my point there of like, really, this has to be a whole team, right? You have to start to build more resources and opportunities in the same way that I think many of us experience when you're kind of growing your own family, or leaving thing. And that does not mean that our individuals have to go in that direction, but it's about independence. But knowing that independence again is going to be tied to what degree of independence is right for your child. So I think that where we see a lot of success within families advocating for their sons and daughters is not to necessarily get your son or daughter a job at X company, or your uncle's place. Those opportunities can work there, but I'll be honest, they're self-limiting to a degree, because that is just one opportunity, right? If you maybe take more of an approach of looking at still using, obviously, if you have those opportunities, there's nothing to say that's wrong to take those opportunities. But again, thinking that if this is a full kind of team, lifelong approach, teaching in practice your son or daughter what it looks like to build community is really good. And that should not necessarily be a transactional thing all the time, right? Because you need to start to show individuals that, this can just be about getting just exposure to something. There's not like, it doesn't have to be about getting a job, right? Like, and the more you do that, and you're kind of like, helping your son or daughter find those right kind of connections and being the guide, then that's a little closer to them learning how to do it. And I could honestly tell like so many stories about this, but just very brief one about actually somebody who was a colleague of mine first, and then later their child became a client of our organization, but started as a colleague. And their whole story was all about learning about coins and trains with their son for about 35 years, to the point that they finally met somebody who happened to have an actual job, like working within the toy train industry. Kind of wild, but like that's what it took. And sure, that person did not have the best jobs before that. They never liked any of those jobs, but the real kind of conviction from that family became that it was more fun to just still have them introduced to trains. and they would say, I want to work in this industry. And everyone would say, well, okay, well, we'll keep going. But at a certain point, the team's message really did just become, great, you got to keep networking, see what happens. But we're not in control of that, right? But it doesn't hurt, right? Because it also gave that person, I think, that freedom. And I should say that I do believe that them taking those other jobs did help in the long run. It required, of course, coaching, management, anything, right? If any of us who've worked, we all need that for ourselves. So it's going to be a challenge, but it can have a payoff. I mean, it's just, I think it's really about that persistence, and then, still making sure that somebody has, those other core skills, because realistically, it did matter that they already at that point in their mid-30s kind of understood how to work, so it, even if they didn't like the jobs. So, cool. So, yeah, so taking opportunities, getting people to network is super cool and vital here. So, we would advise, at 14, it should be the goal to want to get the person into VR. So VR, funny enough, because if you think about it within the labor law context, start working at 14, if we're not talking about farms, it's a whole nother story, but it's like 14, you start working, 64, Social Security becomes available, right? So that's what they call it. But the reality is, if somebody is on Social Security due to disability, that doesn't necessarily apply. Or if they choose not to draw, either way, they can still get this, and they wouldn't even need to be on disability. They just wouldn't take Social Security. They'd go. And so there's loads of workarounds. I mean, the youngest client I've ever worked with, 14, and the oldest client I worked with, 74. So, and so like, yeah, so going from like, this is now like, once they're in VR, this is to kind of give you a sense of like, what are some of the kind of the milestones you can expect going through a service like this. And I would say that, if VR is not your thing, just only take this without the VR, right? You could do this, you could do a version of this very self-directed, right? But certainly, having the funding, having the resource connection, I think does make a difference for lots of folks. So, sorry with that, identifying the vocational job goals. So down here, in the context of Lisa here, because on the last slide we said that, facilitating a family friend to talk to her about art and drawing. Many of you may have those experiences, right? Where we meet somebody in a field and now we can actually see that that's a real job. I personally did not know, I was actually a customer of vocational rehabilitation before I really even knew what vocational rehabilitation was, and well before I ever even met a vocational services provider. Because in my case, I just basically was not somebody that maybe VR was too worried about, or I was also not, in my position of probably a very communicative 19-year-old. I think that my view was, I am leaving this all behind and I will never need special education or anything ever again. I'm a healed individual. And then of course, over time in life, you discover that, it does make a difference when people will kind of provide that extra support for you to know, oh, this is somebody who might help. So I didn't even know that there were like services and things that I probably would have benefited from based on the work that I do now at that age. So in a lot of ways, these are obscure services with or without voc rehab. But, then when I started to know about the field and actually meet people in it, it actually turned out that I actually even did know somebody, somebody's dad who actually worked with my dad. I didn't even know that his job was being a director of voc rehab. So that's kind of the thing here, is that you have to assume that kids don't know as much as you might think they know. Like no one ever said, hey, this is what, Mr. Bob does. No one ever explained that to me. I just knew that he worked kind of in psychology or something. So, which is what my dad did. So, it is important to narrate and show people that those things. This, again, could be job training. It could be post-secondary education for the next step. If we want to look at, adaptation, I mean, that's a floating target that can come before. And then, building self-advocacy. Again, this is probably not as, 1, 2, 3. These things can happen throughout, but definitely the identifying the goals. That's where you want to focus first to know where to go next. So if really making again, the idea of work, progress, getting a skill, learning it, talking about it in terms like that particularly helps a lot of our individuals help understand how these are actually very normalized patterns. And one issue sometimes is we talk very broadly about these things. We don't talk specifically enough sometimes with our individuals about what will you do? Okay. How, and of course, it's always a moving target. So that's where you can also prepare your son or daughter to know that as an expectation, right? We can teach that as an expectation. So, when we start to really again, show that this is like a pattern, if it's just from the top level, how does anyone get a job? Okay. Know what you might want to do, learn a skill around it, maybe test that skill, right? So we can talk about very abstract. And then we say, okay, then you might get an unrelated job. You might do this, right? Things that we may know, yeah, that's going to be initially maybe anxiety provoking. That's again where avoiding the conversation longer or not going back to it actually presents a different kind of challenge, because now we're actually kind of supporting this as a taboo, right? And we're actually really trying to normalize this. And we can't really normalize what someone doesn't know. And again, with different processing comprehension, it might not click the first time. So we keep going back. We find a different way to position it. But it's really about trying to push forward and really allow that time and development to happen. Cool. Yeah. So I missed the little last part there, but really just once you know that program, that again, I'm talking very broadly here. There's so many more specific things, but really getting into that training piece and then trying to test that experience is really important there. I already said a bit about why voc rehab is important, but I think that one of the main things is just to really not rule it out. I mean, it's going to be individually important for people in different ways, but it can help, it can help in these categories. It can help pay for divergent. So our primary services are doing job placement for people. We do focus within remote careers. So that may be a detail I missed. We are all remote. And that's a cool thing for us because that's actually pretty validating from a lot of my experiences working with those software companies where that was some of my early hints working with people where I got to see people who got integrated into the workplace first. And mind you, great offices, all these things, supportive places, and seeing how that person performed in one level and then seeing them transition to remote. And this was years before the pandemic, even just a factor of, really working like many in the tech world, right? Already working remote at this time. Around 2017 this would be. So so I mean there can be a significant difference when we're talking about how we prepare somebody with neurodiversity to work remotely. There's certain advantages that we advocate, but really on a personal level, right? The person has to learn how that's going to benefit them, learn how to manage, of course, distraction, all these other factors. But the reality is that it's available to our population. And what we've seen is it can definitely remove some significant barriers, particularly folks who don't travel well, or, on multiple levels. Travel with support, maybe also fatigue is always a major challenge I would face with more of our commuting individuals. And so this can open avenues. And we also do these services for people with physical disabilities. Also things like agoraphobia. That's actually been something we've been able to tap into and support people who are kind of just getting used to maybe leaving the house, or they never really want to leave the house, but they're getting comfortable doing it this way. So we can always leverage this technology as the message there to support the individual as really like an adaptation. It doesn't have to be an accommodation. Because the nice thing is that this is now a universal accommodation, more or less. It's still contained to certain job fields, right? It's kind of a bad joke, but I say we'll never do a dishwashing training, like we can't really do that, but we can teach the social skills around work and give, this individual one-to-one attention in this way, because actually most of our services we found are really good one-to-one. We do small groups up to 6, but we're honestly not always in favor of that. I mean, it really just depends. A lot of times for many of our services, one of the work adjustment training, we are really trying to focus on emulating really a one-to-one workplace relationship, professional workplace relationship, and working on those social skills. But it's not like your normal kind of social skills training that you think about learning how to shake hands and things. It's a little more personal. So, but anyways, so that's to give you an idea. We are one example of a vocational rehabilitation program. Of course, there's many Goodwills, the ARCs, formerly worked at ARC chapter in Philadelphia and the ARC National for years. So, every organization is going to have its own kind of way of doing things. And so here's just kind of, again, very simplified view. I'll share back out this presentation. Sarah has it too. So I'll just, this could be shared out, and then we'll, if this is more interest to you, but really just starts with connecting with RSA on their website. And then, these are just kind of more general kind of blow by blows. Like, these would be, if you called this the interest evaluation, it looks like the question you're asking is, what do I like to do? So again, like services can help you discover this, but also, if you at all have an interest to really create your own, you can open up an Excel sheet and just say, hey, I'll give you whatever the token of the day is, money or food or time with something they like. You could say, hey, just can you answer a question here, and you can make it up. You can use stuff off the internet, but of course services can help with this too. And then the baseline is like, okay, where am I just like consistently good? Where am I already good? Where is my baseline? It could be a creative process how you discover that, right? Any of this can be. And then job exploration. So like, what jobs, right? This requires comparison. It's jobs plural. So you're going to have to look at a few different ones and kind of look at what the right mix is. And then these are resources that can help with this. Many of these resources like ONET, My Next Move, these are all things that are used and promoted by the state. These are public assets, really. Bureau of Labor and Statistic has created these things. So you can go in and look at like really kind of any categorization of job you want on this thing called ONET, stands for Occupational Network. And so like, that can be another way that if you have a son or daughter that likes to research, enable them to learn how to use this, right? we've had great success with people who have done that. And if that's kind of how they want to do it. But again, it might be the fact that they're not going to know. I mean, not many people know that this exists. And it's going to take a lot of other resources, right? It takes the full combination of these things a lot of times. But it's really interesting once individuals can start to really learn how to research and understand what they need to do in a job. It can really be impactful. And of course, if your individual needs support, that's something that you and your system can help support. And then they can, still enjoy really the benefit of it, right? Like, informed choice is so important in our field, of course, and self-direction is, but I think we do want to remember that we might have to do more for our folks sometimes, right? But we can still include them along the way and just help kind of nudge in those steps, right? And be supportive when that didn't work. Okay, we'll go back. We'll try again. And all that's obviously a huge challenge. So this would be then when you get more into like specific job trainings, right? So we can go deeper. So the theme here is, I want to learn more about this job, right? That would be a positive signal you'd be looking for from your son or daughter. Finding, these are called virtual sandboxes, things like they might be called emulators, or you can find these for different jobs. And there's I think we have it in this slide, but there's a whole, if you know anything about Reddit, people, young adults particularly, use a lot of Reddit resources to see things like job profiles from people who are working. And they'll tell them about what their actual work assignments are, the kind of information that you don't necessarily get by meeting that first level that we said, where you might meet the family friend who's an artist. But from there, it's like, to the extent that they've met one artist, right, doing one job, they got to meet another one, and then maybe ideally another one and another one, until they get to the point where now they're trying certain things around that field, right? They're maybe taking on one-off assignments, or they're doing more apprenticeship type work. And but really just continuing to drive that exposure. And that's where kind of like knowing more about like specific job assignments, or like you can work just like I'll use law, right? In Emily's case, like a lawyer really, if I'm not speaking out of turn, is defined by their practice, right? Defined by their specialty, right? And generally most jobs are, right? There's always gonna be a little wrinkle. You can find a different kind of most jobs, right? And sometimes, especially for our individuals, those little differences matter, right? Like the difference of somebody where I've seen successes of people who their goal or their functioning level may have been to work within janitorial services, but that difference of environment, what they specialize in, this was early in my career, but we'd help find people, like, okay, you focus on that, that's the kind of, this is not really job carving that I'm talking about per se, but it could be if you're all familiar with that. But those are hard to come by these days, but you can take that approach, especially when people are first starting out, show them how it's not just one thing. We're not just a lawyer. Like, what cases do you try? You're not just a teacher, right? It has to be a little more specific. And sometimes our folks, that's not always made clear to our folks. So, and then peers, this can be a chance for you to help coach and encourage people to kind of share more about their job and get some feedback from others. So, these are just more resources that you'll have the links to, of like, this might be for people, still planning. to try to see what maybe has like more of a demand as a career. You know, it's hard because I think maybe I already went past it, but at some point I'll show you, I think in this presentation, we show the unemployment statistic, and it's not meant to discourage anybody, but I will say that competitiveness and demand of a job is important. I think particularly like right now with lots of technological changes happening in the world, competitiveness and growth in jobs is something that I think you can be realistic talking to your son or daughter about, you know, and trying a day in the life. So this is a cool thing. It's for the Forge it's more like what I said with the Reddit, the profiles. They actually will put out like assignments that people can see and kind of like shadow on from big companies, which is like a level of transparency that like not everyone gets, you know. I would say most of us wouldn't have known about our first job environments. I mean, I'd never been in a professional kitchen until I got a job working in a professional kitchen. I'd never been in a vocational training center until I started to work in one. So like, you know, sometimes we don't have that advantage, and we just want to be realistic that our individuals can benefit from that and help bring down the anxiety. So this is like again, more like the signal. So okay, go to Voc Rehab if you want to get that professional help, right? Internships and projects, right? You can do this with or without the first one. And then integrated employment, you know, that's looking at you're ready to start, you know. But just other ones, you know, all really good resources. We also call out, you know, we do have a lot of great peers and people within the space, you know, other people who are kind of doing some of this more tech focused type enablement, and all of our services or jobs that we place people in are for coding. And we don't exclusively work with people with high functioning autism either. But we're always realistic about, you know, how we need to adapt to service, what benefit comes. So those are things that we always explore. So, and then I think I should, okay, so just really summary. And yeah, so we can have some questions. So, but thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much. That was terrific, excellent information. And we will get the PowerPoint out to everybody who signed up. So everybody will have that along with the links and other information. And of course, your contact information to get in touch with Divergent if anybody has questions. I don't see any questions on the chat or the Q&A, but I know that we forwarded you 2 questions from Michelle. So perhaps you can review those and see if maybe you can answer those questions for her.
Absolutely. So, sorry, just putting out my email, and then, so yeah, let me more time. So I think that the first one really about, the how we do job coaching, is that right?
Yeah, so I'm happy to pull them up if
Yeah,
that's
if you don't
helpful to
mind, I
you.
was trying to find it.
Yeah, no problem at all. Give me just a minute. So how does Divergent handle job coaching for an individual starting a new job? A consistent shortfall of Arizona's Voc Rehab program is the lack of consistent on-the-job training to help a person learn the requirements of the job and get settled into the work environment. VR does not guarantee that the same person will provide job coaching for the duration of the on-the-job training, and this results in confusion and anxiety for the individual, especially when that person has autism or an intellectual disability.
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, we're always going to look at like those kind of boundaries that you talked about. You know, we do have a range of kind of arrangements for, you know, who's assigned to who. Some of our individuals, they more so do benefit from the variety, because what we're really trying to look for is also teaching the skill that in work it really is a team. We're not always so closely aligned with one person, or we want people to feel comfortable with a breadth of the team. So that's one of our kind of prevailing goals, because we're always trying to, like, if we can make it closer to work skill, we will. But if it's a particular need, absolutely we want to respect that. And so we do have, I'd say, it's maybe 5%, if I'm thinking about this right, that there's like maybe a 5 to 10% of our individuals who do expect to be with one person. And we try to accommodate that. But at the same time, we are trying to look towards, okay, how would that transition? Because ultimately that's going to be the work transition. We're going to have to teach somebody how to work with other people. But that should absolutely be done in a way that does not provoke the anxiety, right? So that's a probably person specific challenge we would look at. So yeah, we do try to accommodate both realities. And I guess if more so, like with the question of, as I was kind of acknowledging that, you know, our remote ability really does depend on, is this the right kind of work context for it? If the person requires manual demonstration that can't be shown over, a platform like this, then we would just not say that this person's appropriate for service. I'm not necessarily willing to say, based on our experience, that this totally goes along lines of intellectual functioning or not, because we do have projects that we had done in Northern Arizona, predominantly working with transition age youth, in doing this kind of coaching, who had IDD and other neurodiversities. And really the secret there is that people we were able to show could develop relationships online with a vocational professional. However, we are capable to say we did not follow that person into the job, right? Because they were doing an in-person job. Long term, it was not going to be appropriate for them to do remote work. But in the relationship that we developed, we were supporting them transition to an in-person provider, an in-person coaching.
Mhm.
If in the future they had wanted more coaching with us, we would have supported that, to the extent that, we again weren't really doing the manual demonstration, because that's not within their career. Yeah.
Sure. And then the other question is, has Divergent established relationships with local employers that are looking to employ neurodiverse individuals, and that obviously companies that see the value of inclusivity?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, because we being remote, we work throughout the state. So that's kind of one of the weird things, is like we just kind of went where there's a lot of demand. And so a lot of our connections actually came from some of the more rural places in the beginning. And then we do work within Arizona, or Phoenix rather. And so we do have those connections. But I'll be honest to the fact to say that we do typically really try to focus on getting people any kind of opportunity. Some of that has to do though with the remote opportunities. That's what we find is actually our bigger limitation to making, why we don't prioritize as many we think of as a single site employer, or also can just kind of, yeah. So if it's meant like local like that, like we do have folks, particularly people that we've placed jobs in. That's how we continue to open the door for people. But otherwise we're typically more in the constraint that what we have may not be in their local area. And so that's what's funny, is like the rural places, we got so many remote jobs out there for people, but then we incidentally also made some local connections. But places like Kingman even.
Mhm. Okay. Well, great. I don't see any other. Oh, it says, how is Divergent funded? Do we pay for this program through private funds, or is this publicly funded through DES?
Yeah, so that's where Voc Rehab would pay, and yeah, DES, and also yeah, this can be done, you know, if your son or daughter has an IDD case as well, right? They're also duly eligible for Voc Rehab. So that's important to know. Eligible, they will still have to enroll and apply, and that's something you should get a support with the DD coordinator. And because I believe in advocacy, honestly, make that case. You will have to make that case that your son or daughter, regardless of, you know, if they have IDD, if they want employment, you will have to actually be very emphatic about that. I hate to say it like that, but because the history of this is these two systems really haven't coordinated as much. IDD was for a long time seen as this is where people who will never work go. And that's just the wrong message. In the process of this changing really was in 2013, 14. So within the time span of my career, even I've seen so many people move from the DD to the VR system successfully. So it is absolutely possible. And if somebody at DD ever says, "Oh no, they can't go there, they won't do that," I'll just say that's not exactly true. And you should really advocate and try to find somebody who can be more supportive to knowing that, yeah, being in IDD does not stop you from being in VR.
Great. Excellent.
Yeah, so
Right.
that's our main funder. You know, other people, if you don't qualify for VR, yeah, we can arrange private pay, but we'll almost always wait and advocate, unless somebody like really needed to get into VR. We'll always wait. I mean, we'll wait for you to get into VR because honestly, like if you can get the state to pay for it, you really should. It's very expensive, right? As we all know, to support a loved one with a disability, and that's why it's good to be connected with a resource like Kyle and you know, really make the most out of all these opportunities. We just know it's not easy.
Great. Well, I think it's really hopeful that there are jobs out there, that there are remote through Divergent and non-remote through other VR programs. So I hope that everybody felt that this was useful information. Again, we so appreciate, Tom, you taking an hour to come and talk to us. And yeah, if people have questions, you have Tom's email address and we will get the PowerPoint out to everybody. So we hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Stay safe and we'll see you soon again. So thank you.